What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my 2025 Personal Game of the Year awards. So, today, December 11th actually, is in fact the date of the actual Game Awards, and I figured what better way to celebrate than, of course, try to undercut their viewership with my own cutthroat tactics, which will pull in a whopping 0.01% of their average viewership, effectively ruining their enterprise. In all seriousness, I think one of the fun things about talking about video games and the year in video games that we've had is talking, of course, about the ones you enjoyed the most in relation to a bunch of different categories. And while I'm going to go over here the stuff that is important to me in individual categories, still an important few things to know. For starters, obviously this only includes games that released this year in 2025. Usually, a little towards like Christmas, I will do a video where I rank everything I reviewed in a year, old games included. This is obviously not that. What's more, these are just my personal opinions. Probably says as much right in the title. And last but not least, I've done this a few years in a row, and as such, there are a few games, or game categories I should say, that I usually include that I'm going to leave off here for a couple different reasons. Probably the biggest one being the TRPG section. I just didn't play enough TRPGs to really have a ranking here. I mean, realistically, Final Fantasy Tactics, the Evil East Chronicles would win this by default. Because of the two new TRPGs that I reviewed this year, it's not even a competition. I also usually like to include the game that my son was the most intrigued by as I moved to review a bunch of games as well. But honestly, I couldn't tear the kid away from Minecraft this year, and he's also in school and doesn't have as much time to play video games, of course. Either way, moving on to the actual entries themselves. So I wanted to kick it off with something a little bit interesting, which is, I would say, one of the most unique games I played this year. Just because I thought it was kind of doing something fresh and interesting from like a gameplay experience standpoint, and that is actually none other than The Alters. So as I review more and more games, the more I find that games that can do something that it feels unique to me or new to me in some way are usually going to catch my attention more than most things. The Alters, putting you at the heart of a crisis on a distant planet where you were meant to mine a special resource, you are instead now trying to escape with your life and hopefully get people to rescue you. But in order to do this, long story short, you gotta clone yourself a bunch of times. And much of the story revolves around you arguing with yourself, or various versions of yourself, as these clones are a little bit different. They are your alters, with past life decisions having been projected and simulated out via this technology. And overall, it was just a bizarrely interesting game that was doing some fun stuff with the narrative especially, and while the gameplay is decidedly less unique, to be honest, being a mix of like survival and some base building elements. But either way, I came away from that game with the feeling that I've never played anything quite like it before, and so that is why I'm giving it this award. Next up, the best remaster or remake, I suppose, kind of throw them all into one here. I played and reviewed a lot of different remakes and remasters this year. Avernum 4, Oblivion Remastered, Dragon Quest 1 and 2's HD 2D Remake, Final Fantasy Tactics The Evil East Chronicle, the System Shock 2 Remaster, the Trails in the Sky Remake. Honestly, just a lot of these types of games, and so much so that I wanted to include it here, and for me, the winner by a long shot was ultimately Oblivion Remastered. I love Oblivion for a variety of different reasons, but the remastered version, as I have described it before, is almost like somebody took down notes from me about what I would love in a new, different version of that game and made it happen, and it was an incredible experience to run back through all of that content in a new way. After having just the year before actually done a full clear of the original version so I could review it and talk about that game at length, only to turn around and get this beautifully updated one. And while I understand that this game did have some performance problems for some people, I never really encountered any issues like that. And so for me, it was just a wonderful trip down memory lane that also provided a lot of people, hopefully, a way to jump into this game for the first time. And so for me, the winner of that category, again, by quite the long shot. We are far from done, though. This next one may or may not be contentious, I honestly don't know, but I was going over my favorite JRPG from this year, and while I have, again, played quite a few of these, like Trails in the Sky, and then stuff like the Dragon Quest remakes, etc. Ultimately, I think I've got to give this one to Expedition 33, which may or may not be contentious, I suppose, depending on how people choose to define JRPGs. But for me at least, Expedition 33, more than anything else, is in fact a JRPG first. And in that regard, I think it really excels at everything it tries to do. But More than anything, the story was incredibly moving, really sticks with you afterwards. I had a great time playing through it, and the combat system, while not for everybody, was enjoyable enough for me. And then finding all the secrets, especially ahead of release, as I had a review key ahead of time for this one, which means I got to experience a lot of that stuff for myself, all on my own, and I had a great time doing exactly that. And because of all that, it was just a really great experience all around, and I think as a game that was so obviously inspired by a lot of JRPGs of yesteryear, it really iterated on some of that formula in, again, a really fascinating and moving way, which is why it is certainly on the fast track to a lot of people's Game of the Year pick. But it's not my Game of the Year pick, but we're going to keep it moving. Next up, we've got a horror title, which is a bit of a new one for me. I actually played several different horror games this year. Chronos: The New Dawn, Sleep Awake, Silent Hill F even, but more than anything, I just wanted to put this in here so I had an excuse to talk about how much I really wound up enjoying Chronos: The New Dawn. While horror games are not my usual cup of tea, especially psychological horror games or even survival horror games, Chronos just really resonated with me personally. A lot of that was due to the aesthetic of the game, and then trying to take out these monstrosities known as orphans and their fleshy mass as you try to manage, of course, all your resources, which is the survival horror part of it, which can actually be pretty difficult. And that stuff, combined with the narrative itself, trying to get to the bottom of how this orphan problem came to be and how the world ended and what these travelers, you in particular, actually are, what their purpose is, and all of that combined with the moment-to-moment gameplay just really resonated with me, and it seems to have worked out well for everybody else as well, because while hardly a blockbuster or anything, Chronos did review very well, which I was glad to see because I had a lot of fun with it personally, but it's not my usual genre, so I was curious how it would land for everyone else. Either way though, my favorite horror game this year for sure. Next up, we've got my favorite indie game. Now this was an interesting one because this year, more than other years, I really feel like people are kind of all over the place with what they have decided is an indie game. Like personally, Expedition 33 is not an indie game as far as I'm concerned, but I do get where people are coming from with that. However, for me personally, indie-wise, I've got to give it to none other than The Necromancer's Tale. This is an indie CRPG made by a very small studio, but they made a very unique game. So The Necromancer's Tale, as the name would suggest, tells the tale of someone on the road to becoming a necromancer, and it's a really well done version of that. Taking on the role of your character, you have to return home after news of your father's death, and you slowly unravel his secrets and get embroiled in all these dark and arcane arts, which leads you down the path of said necromancer. You have to do things like keep your activities secret from the townsfolk, figure out all these rituals, do quests around town, and it's just a fantastic little game. And while what it does is extremely niche, the thing that it does very, very well. I really had a blast with The Necromancer's Tale, and I think they just kind of perfectly captured the sort of fantasy of, becoming a necromancer really, really well, which is why I think this game actually works. With really something like the Lich Mythic Path from Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous being the only thing that springs to mind that really captures even close to the same feel, and even then it's not the main focus there. But for all of those reasons, had a blast with this one. If you find yourself looking for something a little bit different for relatively cheap, maybe give it a go. Moving into a couple of larger categories now, however, I wanted to include my favorite DLC from this year. I have, in fact, reviewed quite a bit of DLC. All of the Kingdom Come 2 Deliverance DLC, the Indiana Jones DLC, Lex Imperialis for Rogue Trader, Still Wakes the Deep Siren's Rest Overture from Lies of P, Throes of the Watchmaker from Sea of Stars. It's been a busy year for DLC, actually. And yet there has to be a winner, and for me at least, it was definitely the Overture DLC from Lies of P. And while some people may have expected Lex Imperialis, I did enjoy that one quite a bit. But, it wasn't quite as good as Void Shadows, and ultimately I think the Overture DLC was just a fantastic bit of content to an already fantastic game that added a lot of fun mechanics, a lot of fun bosses, and even some difficulty settings to allow people to hopefully enjoy the game that is Lies of P that much more. So when push comes to shove, I think it was definitely my favorite. But speaking of Soulslikes with Lies of P, what was my favorite Souls-like this year? Honestly, I think if you watch the channel much at all, you already know that the answer is the first Berserker, Kazan. I've played a fair few Souls-likes this year, and I usually do. I enjoy them well enough. But this year, nothing really came close to what Kazan was for me. I just had a blast with the way that game's mechanics works, the combat styles and stuff, the little quality of life features they added. And I'll try to keep this one short just because I think people have heard me bang on about Kazan many times over at this point, but I really did have a blast with that game, and the fact that it did not even get nominated for an actual game award at the Game Awards is criminal. It's crazy to me that that game did not get nominated. And so while it might not be number one on the charts, it's number one in our hearts. Or whatever else people say, I guess. But that does ultimately bring us to our penultimate entry for the action series, and I've got to give this to Ninja Gaiden 4, which is a game that, truth be told, I'm not very good at, but I did have a blast with it. The combat was a ton of fun, which is probably a good thing, given that the game really doesn't have too much else going on besides its combat. And truth be told, wasn't really a big fan of Yakumo. However, ultimately, action games are about the action, and on that front, I had a blast being really bad at Ninja Gaiden 4's combat system. And speaking for myself, at least, of course, it was really fascinating to see a system in motion and be able to, understand the ins and outs of it, and also just completely fail at the execution. I did okay, but I certainly died a lot, mind you, but I did alright up until, Master Ninja difficulty, and then I was just getting absolutely wrecked. And so, while I've played a few different action games, or I think games that could fall under that larger umbrella generally, in terms of the actual action itself, I've really got to hand it to Ninja Gaiden 4, which is what we are doing here. That does, however, bring us to the final entry, the most important perhaps, the Game of the Year award. For me, it was Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 all day, every day. I had a blast concluding Henry's journey. I am fairly certain it is the game I have played most in terms of just raw number of hours this year. I completed the hardcore all negative perks run, played through all the DLCs, of course, and while the DLCs themselves were a little on the short side for my liking, I was hoping they would be a little more expansive than they ultimately were, but still, it was fun. It's just an incredibly fantastic, systematic journey that really delivers on the promises and moments that were set up in the first game with, where that story was probably going to go, and it's such a payoff, so much so that if I was doing a specific RPG category, it would probably ultimately win that too. I really just had so much fun with this game. And while there were plenty of other RPGs this year that I also enjoyed, at the end of the day, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was the biggest, the boldest, and honestly, just like its predecessor, reminds me a lot of Oblivion, which is probably a good part of why I liked it so much. Either way, though, can't wait to see what Warhorse Studios does next, as this is pretty much the end of Henry's journey, but man, what a journey it was. Which is why it wins the ultimate prize this year. But that is pretty much going to do it for this particular video. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, comment, subscribe. I'm sure I already have a million comments about everybody else's favorite games or Game of the Year winners for them personally. And so, while you're busy judging my Game of the Year picks, tell me yours so I can judge them as well. But in all seriousness, I appreciate you guys sharing this year in gaming with me. I had a blast with it. I hope you had half as much fun as I did. Still some more stuff to come, but it's already been great. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.